everyone. Tonight, we're going to walk slowly through a story that begins in the soft hum of an ordinary kitchen and ends in a place where the air itself feels thinner, like grief has changed the weather. I'll keep my voice low, like we're sitting across a small table, steam lifting from a chipped mug, the kind you never throw away, because the crack looks like a river on a map. You'll hear drawers light a refrigerator tick, the polite sigh of an old house. And somewhere between those sounds, you might also hear a decision, forming the kind that reroutes a life. If you've ever been blindsided by a sentence that felt like a door slamming in the next room, you'll recognize the moment when your knees remember they're not as young as your optimism. And yes, a bold reality check: if you try to outrun the truth, you probably won't make it out alive, at least not the version of you that deserves to breathe.
Vì vậy trước khi bạn cảm thấy thoải mái, hãy dành chút thời gian để thích video và đăng ký, nhưng chỉ khi bạn thực sự thích những gì tôi làm ở đây.
Tell me where you're listening from and what time the clock says in your corner of the world.
Bây giờ hãy tắt đèn, có thể bắt quạt để có tiếng ồn nhẹ nhàng, và chúng ta hãy cùng nhau bắt đầu hành trình tối nay.
The call came while I was arranging white lilies in a glass pitcher that used to hold iced tea on summer Sundays. Caleb's favorite always lilies. He said they smelled like forgiveness. The phone rattled against the counter, an old landline with a curly cord that tangles like a guilty story. I picked up. The plastic felt cool, as if it had been waiting for me to get brave. Evelyn Serena said flat as a closed book. I'm calling about the arrangements. Arrangements is a slippery word. It could mean flowers, chairs, or the rest of your life. Something in her tone made the hair on my arms rise like it had its own opinion. Arrangements for what I asked, though, the lilies already knew. Caleb passed yesterday, she said, and I swear the world leaned to one side like a ferry taking a hard turn. She let the sentence sit, no cushion, no breath. Complications. Complications, as if my son were a messy invoice someone had finally filed away. I pressed my palm to the counter to steady the plates on the shelf I keep in my chest. Why didn't anyone call me? I tried. You didn't answer? She said the way people read terms and conditions, fast, defensive, prepared to blame the user. I glanced at my cell. No missed calls. The landline had no blinking red apology either. We're planning a small service, Serena continued. Thursday at 2, my church. My church, not ours. Caleb was baptized at St. Luke's, where the pews smell like lemon oil and winter coats. Serena's church is full of smart lighting and coffee that tastes like ambition. I wanted to argue, but my throat had that tightening you get right before a storm tilts the trees. I should be there, I said. I think it would be better if you didn't come, Serena said, voice like the edge of a paper you only realize is sharp after it slices you. It could be emotional. You don't say, I whispered. And yes, the sarcasm arrived like an old friend wearing house shoes. Joke 1. I promise I'm keeping count. Humor is my low-dose aspirin. I steadied myself and aimed for the kind of dignity my mother used to iron into Sunday dresses. He is my son. He was my husband, she countered, and there was the past tense, clean and final. Look, Evelyn, where have you been the last 5 years? The relationship was distant. Academic debate phrase coming. Don't worry, I'll label it on the syllabus in the margins. You're confusing correlation with causation, I said softly. You may have noticed distance, but you also built fences. Silence. The fridge clicked awake, an appliance clearing its throat. Somewhere in the house, the floorboards gave a settling sigh, the sound a home makes when it knows you're bracing. Thursday at 2, Serena repeated. Immediate family only. Closed casket. Closed casket, I echoed, and the lilies watched me like witnesses. Caleb was 34. 34 is for lease agreements and camping mistakes, not closed anything. I pictured him in that ridiculous green hoodie he wore when he came home from college, pockets full of loose screws and half a granola bar. Quirky tidbit here. My junk drawer still contains a Ziploc labeled Caleb's Important Mystery Screws, because apparently every shelf in this family reproduces extra hardware when no one's looking. I'll confirm the details, I said, because old age wisdom, don't bristle, verify, has saved me more than sunscreen. When you've lived long enough, you learn to check the calendar ink before committing your heart. It's not cynicism, it's conservation of resources. After Serena hung up, no condolence, no grace, note, I called St. Luke's Medical Center, where I thought Caleb had been. The cheerful operator sounded like wind chimes. No patient by that name in the last 6 months, she said. And we don't have a Dr. Whitmore. I thanked her because manners are what you do when logic has left the building, then dialed Breyer and Sons Funeral Home. The woman there softened her voice the way people do when they're sure your bones might crack. Mrs. Whitaker, may I call you Evelyn? We have a service for Caleb scheduled. Thursday at 2, yes. Closed casket. Small. Mrs. Whitaker is Serena, I said. I'm Evelyn. I'm his mother. A breath, then a quiet correction like someone smoothing a sheet. I'm so sorry, ma'am. The guest list was finalized. We were told you preferred to grieve privately. There it was, a script where I hadn't written my lines. Who told you that? Serena, she said, as if the name could carry its own citation. I thanked her, hung up, and let the room shrink to a pinpoint. An elderly wisdom event arrived then, uninvited but kind. My father's voice from a life where the TV still had dials. When information doesn't make sense, sit down, drink water, and ask a better question. So I sat, sipped from a glass that tasted faintly of the dishwasher's lemon promise, and asked the air, who benefits from my silence? Another joke gently, the air declined to comment, very on brand. Joke 2. We're pacing ourselves. I called back, determined to pry one hinge loose on this coffin of confusion. But Breyer and Sons had stepped away from the desk, which is customer service for I can't do anything else for you without getting a manager and a headache. The next morning, though, they reached me voice crisp with fresh coffee. Apologies, Evelyn. There's been a change. The service has moved up to tomorrow at 10. Tomorrow. Less than 12 hours notice for a mother who lives 40 minutes away and has a slow car with opinions about hills. The neighbor's cat waddled past the window like a disgruntled loaf of bread, and I laughed gently because even a smile felt like an overreach. Joke 3. A cat joke is the chamomile of comedy. I grabbed my notebook, the one with a cover that says, "Nevertheless, she persisted," which I bought ironically and then grew into. I wrote, Serena controls the time, Serena controls the access, Serena controls the story. Control is a hungry thing. It eats whatever is left on the table. If you're keeping score, and I am by instinct as much as by need, you'll notice how language did the heavy lifting. Arrangements. Complications. Prefer to grieve privately. Words that sound like pillows until you realize they're smothering you. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, sure, but in family politics, absence is usually choreography. I checked my phones again, the cell, the landline. Nothing. The only voicemail was from my pharmacy reminding me I'm a person with prescriptions, which is to say, a person with a future, however negotiated. I stood at the sink, and because grief makes you do math with the universe, I counted the lilies. 10 perfect heads, 1 bent. I trimmed the stem at an angle, a tiny mercy, and said out loud, "Caleb, if you can hear me, I'm trying." The house replied with a small pop from a baseboard heater, the architectural equivalent of I thought of Serena's voice, how it never cracked, not even as she moved my son's farewell, like furniture she owned. I thought of Caleb's too, how it warmed when he was explaining something. My favorite fact he ever taught me: a failing smoke alarm chirps every 43 seconds, just long enough to make you question your sanity between chirps. He once timed it for me with the stopwatch on his phone, triumphant, as if he domesticated time itself. "See, Mom, predictable," he grinned. Predictable is the first ingredient in safety. I dried my hands, smoothed the notebook, and dialed one more number, the one that would let me hear Serena confirm the moved-up schedule in her own words. No answer. A text arrived instead. "Tomorrow at 10. Keep it together." I stared until the letters blurred, then blinked hard, rewrote them in my mind into something I could live tomorrow at 10. I will be there. I will keep it together. And then I will take it apart piece by piece until the truth can breathe. Outside, evening settled like a blanket. Someone shook once to release the last gold threads of sun. I left the lilies on the table, their fragrance walking the room in soft socks, and placed my keys by the door. A small preparation, because preparation is how you give courage a place to sit. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the doorway long enough for my eyes to learn the dark. The phone sat where I'd leave it, obedient, silent, not innocent. I whispered the oldest sentence I know that still works. "We'll see." It is both promise and challenge. Then I went to lay out a black dress that doesn't wrinkle because the world already had enough of those. The dress hung like a shadow on the back of my bedroom door, a silhouette that could pass for respect in most lighting. I'd chosen flats over heels, not out of modesty, but because a twisted ankle would not be a dignified reason to miss my own son's funeral. The night before sleep was a suggestion I didn't take. I sat in the living room with the TV on mute, a documentary about coral reefs, looping visuals of slow-breathing colors. It struck me how corals thrive quietly for decades, then bleach almost overnight when conditions sour. Families aren't so different. At 7:15 the next morning, coffee in hand, I called Breyer & Sons again. The same gentle voice confirmed the new time. I asked a casual-sounding question. Will there be a program or printed order of service? And got the hesitation I was fishing for. Mrs. Whitaker didn't request any. No programs meant no list of attendees, no trace of me missing from anything official. It was tidy in the way a locked drawer is tidy, you can't see the mess. When I pulled into the funeral home's lot at 9:45, a strange emptiness hung over it. Just Serena's silver SUV, the kind of car that looks like it comes with a subscription to a lifestyle blog. I stayed in my car, gripping the steering wheel, while an old age wisdom bubbled up: don't walk into any room you haven't already mapped in your mind. My father used to say it before holiday dinners, when the family tension was thick enough to butter. I imagined the service inside the closed casket, Serena in black with a posture like she's at a board meeting. Maybe 2 of her friends from church as witnesses. No one from my side of the family, no one to nod at me across the room. Then I realized that was the point. In Serena's choreography, I was not meant to be in the frame. I didn't go in. Instead, I sat in the parking lot and called St. Luke's Medical Center again just to poke the bruise. Same answer, no. Caleb Morrison, no. Dr. Whitmore. "Are you sure you have the right facility?" the clerk asked, voice polite but edged with suspicion, as though I'd called to prank her on a Tuesday morning. When I hung up, a tap on my window startled me. It was my neighbor from across the street, Mrs. Burnham, a retired librarian who had the unnerving skill of appearing exactly when you least expected and needed advice. She'd been Caleb's babysitter for 2 summers when he was small. "You here for the service?" she asked, peering in. I said, my voice tighter than I meant. Her eyes narrowed. "I saw Serena at the market last week. Funny thing, she was buying flowers, white lilies. Told the cashier they were for a hospital room, but wouldn't say whose. She seemed jumpy. It was a quirky detail, the kind you file away because it smells like truth in a world of staged air freshener. White lilies, hospital room, jumpiness. My mind started pinning the pieces on an invisible corkboard. We stood in the parking lot until 10 o'clock rolled over us like a slow tide. No one else arrived. The idea of a funeral with no crowd felt unnatural, like a punchline without the setup. When the service began inside, I didn't hear music or muffled voices, just the HVAC system's steady hum. It was as if the building was pretending nothing was happening. By 10:30, Serena's SUV pulled away. She didn't see me. Or maybe she did, and filed it under things to manage later. I let her go, telling myself that patience is not the absence of action, it's the preparation of it. That's the kind of intellectual nugget you start believing when you've lived long enough to watch people talk themselves into their own traps. Back home, the lilies I'd arranged were wilting at the edges. I trimmed the stems again, dropping the scraps into the compost like tiny green secrets. I thought about calling Serena, but something in me wanted her to make the next move. Instead, I called Mrs. Burnham, who answered with a dry well that was quick. I asked if she'd noticed anything else unusual about Serena lately. Aside from the fact that she's been parking her car in the alley instead of the driveway, she said. Like she doesn't want people to see when she's home that. And she's been walking her dog at odd hours, midnight even. People change their routines when they're hiding something. Evelyn, it's like misshelving books in a library. Eventually someone finds them, but it takes longer if you keep moving them around. Her analogy hit me quirky, yes, but apt. Misshelving isn't about removing the book. It's about making it hard to access. That was Serena's specialty. She didn't erase me. She just kept putting me in the wrong aisle. That night, I made a list in my notebook. Not a to-do list, but a to-know list. Where was Caleb hospitalized? Who pronounced him dead? Why the rush on the funeral? What's in the will, if there is one? I added one more. Though I didn't know yet if it was hope or punishment. Where is he buried? By the time the street lamps clicked on, I'd decided on my approach. I'd wait. Serena liked control, and people like that can't resist checking if their strings are still attached. She would call. When she did, I'd be ready. And sure enough, 3 days later, the phone rang while I was in the garden, trimming back my rosemary bush, which has survived more winters than some marriages. Evelyn, she said, skipping hello. Her voice had lost that tight composure, replaced with something frayed. What are you doing to my life? That's the thing about control. It's like a leash. You don't notice it's gone until the dog bolts. I wiped my hands on my jeans, the scent of rosemary clinging to my fingers, and leaned against the kitchen counter with the phone pressed to my ear. What am I doing to your life, Serena? I kept my tone slow, like I was speaking to a child trying to hide a broken vase behind her back. You called me, remember? You've been asking questions, she snapped. Talking to people. Calling places. I got a call from a lawyer this morning. Caleb's lawyer. He says there's an issue with the will, that you're somehow involved. Old age wisdom says, when someone accuses you without details, let the silence stretch until they trip over it. I didn't know Caleb even had a will, I said finally. You didn't? Her voice cracked in a way that made me picture her pacing hair pulled tighter than her alibi. Don't play dumb. You've been digging. Serena, I've been trying to find out where my son is buried, I said. I think that's allowed. A pause. Then a flat delivery, like she was reading from a script she didn't like. Hillside Memorial. Section C, plot 247. The information hit me harder than I expected. I grabbed a pen from the junk drawer right next to the bag of Caleb's important mystery screws and wrote it down on the back of an old grocery list. I'd been chasing that one piece of truth for a week, and she tossed it out like an afterthought. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me yet. Her voice dipped into something I hadn't heard before, uncertainty. We need to talk, today. I'll come by after I've been to the cemetery. No, before. That was pure Serena, again urgent controlling. It's important, Evelyn. I agreed mostly because people who suddenly need to confess are best handled face to face while the cracks are fresh. The drive to her house felt different this time. I noticed the blinds half drawn, the overfull recycling bin, with at least 3 wine bottles peeking out, labels facing down like they were hiding. When she opened the door, Serena looked like a magazine page, left out in the rain, wrinkled, faded, smudged at the edges.
Coffee? She asked, already walking toward the kitchen.
The counters were buried under paper envelopes, photocopies, legal pads, covered in her tidy, aggressive handwriting. She poured coffee into 2 mugs without asking how I take mine. And aside for the curious, she makes it strong enough to strip paint. I've had worse, but only in gas stations that also sell fishing bait. She got straight to it. Caleb changed his will 3 months ago, she said. Left everything to you. The house, the savings, the insurance. I took a slow sip, ignoring the way the coffee bit at my tongue. Did he say why? Her eyes slid toward the paper piles. He hired a private investigator, wanted to know why you and he had grown apart. She used air quotes, which is the punctuation of denial. The investigator found things, such as Serena let out a breath, long and shaky. Phone records, emails, plans I canceled without telling him. Messages I sent from his phone pretending to be him, saying he was too busy to see you. She stopped, swallowed. I deleted emails from you before he could read them. There it was, the quiet vandalism of a relationship. I felt something cold slide into my chest. So you decided to make me vanish. I thought. She hesitated, then looked straight at me. When we got married, it was like I was sharing him with you. Every decision, every holiday, he had to check with Mom. I wanted to be first in his life. I leaned back in my chair. So you cut the phone lines, blocked the roads, and told him I'd moved away. Her voice rose a notch. I was protecting my marriage. That was my cue for the academic debate phrase, "You've confused protection with possession." She flinched. It worked for a while. We were fine. Until a few months ago when he started bringing you up again, asking questions I couldn't answer without lying. And then he changed the will, wrote a letter for you. The lawyer has it. She rubbed her forehead. I think he was planning to leave me. For a moment, the only sound in the kitchen was the refrigerator's hum. I thought of the neighbor's advice about misshelved books, how you can hide them, but eventually someone notices the gap. His name's Mark Ellison, Serena added quietly. The lawyer. He's expecting you tomorrow at 10. I stood setting the coffee down on a stack of unpaid utility bills. I'll be there. As I walked to the door, she called after me. Evelyn, what are you going to do about the house? About everything? I didn't turn around. I'm going to find out exactly what my son wanted me to know. Outside, the air felt sharper, like it had shed a layer of politeness. I slipped the grocery list with the grave location into my coat pocket and thought about how sometimes the first truth you get is just bait for the bigger ones waiting. I didn't drive straight to Hillside Memorial, even with the plot number inked on a grocery list in my pocket like a borrowed courage. For 7 days, I circled the idea the way you circle a cold pool toe flinch retreat. The house went quiet in that particular way. Grief engineers, the clock ticked louder, the kettle sighed longer, even the mail fell through the slot with the dignity of a eulogy. I told myself I was waiting for better weather, for less wind, for a sign. The old age wisdom that finally cracked the stalemate was simpler. You don't need permission to love your child out loud. It arrived while I was aligning spoons in the drawer, a ritual I perform when I want the world to stop wobbling. In those 7 days, I became a caller of places. It was almost a profession. I rang hospitals within 50 miles, asking for any trace of a patient named Caleb Morrison, any attending named Dr. Whitmore. Nothing. I left messages with 2 cemeteries and a third that turned out to be a dog park with a very solemn website. Quirky tidbit, the park's memorial grove is actually 3 ginkgo trees and a plaque donated by a pet bakery. Grief is an economy with confusing receipts. I dialed Breyer & Sons again and again just to hear a voice address me as ma'am, like it could pin my unraveling back onto its spool. On the 4th day, I was in the garden clipping deadheads for my roses. Pruning is a thesis about hope. If you ask me when Mrs. Burnham called across the fence, she held up a Tupperware of lemon bars like a white flag. "You don't have to eat them," she said. "You just have to let them exist on your counter." Hospitality as exposure therapy. She's smarter than her cardigans suggest. We talked about nothing until nothing softened, and then she nodded at the sky the way old friends do when words feel like tight shoes. "You'll know when to go," she said. I kept a log in my notebook anyway, because academia trained me to love footnotes, even when life refuses to cite itself properly. The page was a map of small tries, call St. Luke's, no. Record leave message with Hillside Memorial, no return search county. Death notices, blank text. Serena gently worded, brutally unanswered. In the margins, I wrote the phrase that wants to litigate every family argument post hoc, ergo propter hoc. After, therefore, because of. It's a fallacy with good posture. Just because silence followed Serena's decisions didn't mean silence was caused by them. Except sometimes it did. By the 5th night, the house had the temperature of a church vestibule, cool and too careful. I slept on the couch with the TV butter mute, letting a cooking show move its colors across the room. Onions, sweating butter, foaming a steak, flipped with the kind of confidence I reserve for signing tax returns. At 3 a.m., I laughed at the ceiling because I realized I hadn't eaten a real meal in 2 days unless we're counting a sleeve of crackers as a charcuterie board for the emotionally compromised. Joke 1. Keep me honest, I'm rationing levity like it's 1943 sugar. On the 6th morning, I drove to Hillside and parked under a maple that had the decency to rustle. I did not get out. I watched 2 groundskeepers ease a tarp onto the back of a low cart, a choreography of competence that made my throat ache. A woman in a navy coat walked past my car and rested her palm on a headstone like it was a doorknob to a room only she could enter. I admired the way she didn't hurry. Then I turned the key and drove home, because sometimes courage comes on a timer and mine ran out at the edge of the lot. Old age wisdom revised, you can try again tomorrow and it still counts. On the 7th day, because grief loves a biblical rhythm, the phone rang while I was trying to decide if a person can live on tea and citrus. Evelyn Serena said, without hello. The panic in her voice was new. It made the hairs at the back of my neck stand up like a choir. What are you doing to my life? Hi, Serena, I said, keeping my tone dialed to bedside manner. What life specifically are we discussing? The lawyer, she said, and now I could hear pacing. Mark Ellison. He wants documentation. Marriage certificate, insurance policies, bank statements, everything. He says there's a complication with probate. He says Caleb changed things. She swallowed audibly. He says you need to be there. A small, unkind part of me wanted to say, you mean the way I needed to be at the service? Joke too barely housebroken. Instead, I asked, did he say what the complication is? He didn't just that it's urgent. Paper rustled, her breath hitching. He asked if I had access to Caleb's email. He asked if I'd ever interfered with communication. There was a long, narrow silence. Evelyn, I need to know what you told him. I told him my son is dead, and I'm learning the news as if I've been living in a different city than the truth I said. I told him I have questions. "This is going to ruin me," she whispered. And if her voice were a color, it would be the gray of dishwater when you've waited too long to do the plates. "You did the ruining," I said, and heard in my own words the professor I used to be, thin patience, crisp syntax. Then I softened because hard truths travel better with a blanket. "Serena, listen. Panic is a poor project manager. Gather what he asked for. We'll go tomorrow."
Will you?
She started and then stopped, the word dangling like an unbuttoned cuff. "Will you come over today?" I looked at the list on the counter at the plot number, pretending to be enough. "Not today," I said. "I'm going to Hillside." She made a sound relief or dread, it was hard to tell, and I ended the call before her need could attach itself to my ankles. Driving there this time, the sky had that milky brightness that makes you squint, as if you're trying to see through a curtain. I parked in the same spot beneath the maple and told my hands they could tremble later. Section C was a gentle slope. The plaques there favor restraint names, dates, and occasional line of scripture that could pass as a weather report. I walked rows the way you read a dictionary, hoping for a specific word, learning other ones anyway. I found him by a small nick in the granite, a flaw that made the stone feel like it belonged to a person, not a production line. Caleb Morrison, 1991 to 2025. Nothing else. No beloved son, no friend, no the guy who could fix any wobbly table with a folded sugar packet. I touched the M like it might bruise, and then I knelt because standing felt like I was trying to be taller than a fact. The grass was damp and my knees complained in that stereo crackle I've come to respect. I told him about the 7 days, about how I'd been orbiting the ground because the ground felt too final, and about Serena's phone call with its ragged edges. I told him I'd meet the lawyer. I told him I hadn't forgotten the way he timed smoke alarm chirps. I left 2 lilies, both a little worn from the week, because love doesn't always get there early, but it shows up anyway. On my way back to the car, I passed a bench with a bronze plaque that said in a font that tried very hard to be kind, "Sit as long as you need." I did. An hour has different speeds depending on whether you're in it or out of it. The wind lifted, wove itself through the maple, and came back with the kind of calm you only rent. At home, I washed my hands twice because cemetery grass lingers, and so does the habit of pretending you can scrub the ache away. Then I stacked a folder for tomorrow IDs, my address book, the notebook with its crooked tabs, like a haircut done by someone trustworthy but rushed. I wrote one more line in the margin next to the Latin fallacy, boxed it, underlined it once. Correlation isn't causation, but a pattern is a kind of proof. Right before bed, Serena texted again, 10 a.m. Mark Ellison, "Please be kind." I could have replied something mean, something athletic. Instead, I typed, "Bring the truth. It travels lighter." Joke 3. I almost added a suitcase emoji, but my thumbs chose restraint. Growth looks silly up close. Then I set 2 alarms because I trust technology, but I also keep a paper calendar in the drawer with stamps and 3 orphaned keys. Quirky inventory of a life that expects doors. Mark Ellison's office was one of those dignified downtown buildings with brickwork so straight you'd think gravity had signed a contract. The brass plaque by the door had been polished within an inch of its life. And inside, the air smelled faintly of leather, and an even fainter note of whatever cologne lawyers wear to suggest they can both comfort you and bill you in the same hour. Old age wisdom hit me as I stepped in. Never trust a professional whose desk is too clean. It means they hide the chaos where you can't see it. The receptionist, a woman with an expression that said she could survive either a nuclear event or a high-maintenance wedding, ushered me into Mark's office. He stood to shake my hand, firm, polite, the handshake of a man who's read enough etiquette books to know exactly how long to hold it. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, and I caught a flicker of awareness when I didn't correct him. Evelyn Whitaker is the name on my driver's license, but Morrison is how Caleb knew me. I understand Serena told you Caleb made some changes. He began pulling a thick file from his desk drawer. 3 months ago, he updated his will, hired a private investigator, and left instructions for me to contact you under certain circumstances.
The file made a soft thud on the desk, like it carried weight beyond paper. He slid a sealed envelope toward me. Caleb's handwriting was on the front, neat, careful, but with that slight upward tilt he got when he was writing fast and excited. My hands felt like they'd been replaced with something slower.
"Would you like privacy to read it?" Mark asked. I nodded. He stepped out, closing the door with a sound so soft it felt deliberate.
The letter began with my name, just my name, and then the words swam for a moment before they sharpened into his voice. He wrote about how he'd noticed the gap between us widening, how every attempt to call or visit had been blocked by reasons that didn't quite add up. He trusted Serena when she said I was busy, that I wanted space. "It didn't feel right, Mom," he wrote, "because I never stopped needing you." He told me about the investigator's findings. My calls unanswered because they were intercepted. My emails deleted, my plans canceled, before he even knew they existed. He confronted her, and she admitted it. She said she wanted to be first in my life. The letter went on, "But love isn't a competition. You taught me that when I was 17 and afraid to date a girl I really liked. You said the heart has infinite capacity." Then came the part that made my breath hitch. "I'm leaving everything to you, not because of blood, but because you're my real family. I'm giving you the power to decide what happens to Serena. If you want to take care of her, you can. If you want her to face the consequences, you can. I trust you to choose with wisdom, not revenge." And at the bottom, P.S. "I hid a key in the old coffee can in your kitchen. It's for a safety deposit box. There's something in there I want you to have." When I finished, I sat for a while, letting the silence in the room take on the shape of Caleb's presence. It wasn't the sharp silence of absence, it was something steadier, like a hand on your shoulder. Mark returned and slid another document toward me, the investigator's report. "It's thorough," he said. "Phone logs, email records, even witness statements from neighbors who noticed you coming less often." He outlined the assets the house worth about $300,000, savings of $180,000, a life insurance policy for $500,000, nearly $1 million in total. Legally, Serena had no claim. Texas doesn't grant spousal rights to inheritances unless they're explicitly named, he explained. I asked him if Serena knew yet. "She knows about the change, yes," he said. "She's concerned. She's called here several times since." "Did she admit to what she did?" Mark's eyes were steady, enough to make it clear she understands there will be consequences. I thought of Caleb's words, "wisdom, not revenge," and the odd comfort of that coffee can waiting at home. "I'll need time to decide," I said. "Take all you need," he replied, sliding a smaller envelope across the desk. "Instructions for the safety deposit box. He was very clear that you should go alone. Old age wisdom. Sometimes the hardest part of the truth isn't hearing it. It's realizing you've been right all along." The investigator's neat columns and highlighted entries were a ledger of what I'd felt in my bones for years. Every too busy, every maybe next time quantified in dates and times. I left the office holding Caleb's letter like it might dissolve if I loosened my grip. Outside, the air was the kind that makes you feel like the world is trying to keep you awake. A little wind, a little sunlight through thin clouds. The maple leaves along Main Street were just starting to turn, and for a second I imagined walking with him under them like we used to when he was a teenager, and thought I didn't notice him slipping extra fries from the bag before we got home. Joke one for the day. He called it quality control. By the time I reached my car, the decision was half formed: see the grave Open the coffee can, then the box. Answers first, choices later. Because wisdom, I've learned, is a slow eater. The drive to Hillside Memorial felt different now that I had Caleb's words in my bag. A letter folded neatly in its envelope, still warm from my hands. The road curved gently toward the cemetery, and I found myself thinking about how many times I'd driven that same route to pick him up from baseball practice, or from a friend's house, where the snacks were always mysteriously better than mine. Quirky tidbit, he once confessed he liked their snacks more because they had the fun ketchup with a flip cap, as if convenience had flavor. The gate to Section C was open, and the gravel crunched under my tires in a way that sounded like polite applause. I parked under the maple I'd chosen before a small point of continuity in a week where everything else felt rewritten. This time I walked straight to plot 247. The headstone was still the same stark thing, Caleb Morrison, the dates, and nothing else. No epitaph, no hint of the laugh that used to break across his face like sunlight through blinds. I knelt, knees sinking into damp earth, and set down 3 fresh lilies, better ones than before, their petals tight at the tips, holding back the bloom the way I'd held back tears all week. I saw your letter, I told him. You didn't let go of me, not even when I thought you had. The wind carried a smell of cut grass and stone dust, and I stayed long enough for it to change direction twice. Old age wisdom. If you sit still long enough in a place, the truth will find a comfortable seat beside you. When I finally rose, I didn't go straight home. Instead, I stopped by the grocery store for milk and bread, the kind of errand that makes grief feel almost manageable. I also picked up a lemon pie. Caleb's favorite, though he always insisted it needed just a touch more sugar, which was his way of saying half the shaker. Back in my kitchen, I reached for the top shelf of the pantry. The old coffee can was there, just as he described, dusty dented, still wearing the faded Maxwell House label like a badge of endurance. Inside coins clinked against something harder. I poured it out on the table, quarters, dimes, nickels, and a small brass key with a tag box 247. There was also a tissue-wrapped bundle. Inside was the silver bracelet I'd given him for his 16th birthday, engraved inside with the words, "My son, my pride, my joy." He'd worn it daily for years, and I thought he'd outgrown it or lost it in the chaos of young adulthood. But here it was, polished enough to catch the light even through the tissue. I held it in my palm, the metal warming quickly, and realized he must have planned this. The matching number of the box and the grave plot, the bracelet in the can, the letter to lead me here. Academic phrase for the moment, deliberate redundancy. In engineering, it means creating multiple paths to the same result, ensuring it survives even if one fails. Caleb had built redundancy into his goodbye. The next morning, I took the key to First National Bank. The clerk led me to the basement vault, a room lined with metal boxes that looked like a chorus line of secrets. Box 247 slid out smoothly, and inside was a manila envelope and a small velvet jewelry box. The envelope held 3 letters written over the past 2 years. The first 18 months ago was full of confusion. "I don't understand what happened to us, Mom. Did I do something?" The second 8 months ago carried suspicion. "Nola always has a reason we can't visit. I'm starting to think she's lying." The third, just 6 weeks ago, was resolve. "I'm going to find out the truth. I miss you more than I can say." The jewelry box held my mother's ring, the one I'd given Caleb when he got engaged, with the suggestion that it be saved for his first daughter. He'd saved it for me instead with a note, "This belongs with you. Love, your son." By the time I left the bank, the ring was on my finger, the bracelet in my bag, and the letters tucked inside Caleb's original note, like they'd always belonged together. That evening, my phone rang again. Serena. Her voice was different, less panic, more something like surrender. "I need to tell you everything," she said.
about why I did what I did, about what happened before Caleb and I married.
Why now?
Because I think you deserve to know the whole truth, she said, and because it's the last thing I have to give you. I agreed to come the next morning mostly because unanswered questions are worse company than even your worst enemy. Serena opened the door like she'd been standing on the other side for hours waiting for the knock. Her hair was brushed but unstyled, and she wore a sweater with a pulled thread near the hem, proof that she'd been too distracted to notice the small unravelings. The living room smelled faintly of coffee and something sweet, like she'd tried to make the place welcoming without quite knowing how. We sat facing each other, the coffee table between us, bare except for 2 mugs and a box of tissues. Old age wisdom floated in people tell the truth more easily when there's less clutter in the room. It's harder to hide behind clean surfaces. I need to start from before Caleb, she said, staring at her coffee. I was engaged once before I met him. His name was Marcus. We'd planned everything, venue, guest list, honeymoon. And then his mother decided I wasn't right for him. Wrong background, wrong everything. She convinced him I didn't love him, that I was after his money. He called off the wedding 3 weeks before the date. Her voice wavered. When I met Caleb, I swore I'd never let another mother take someone from me. I know it doesn't justify what I did, but I wasn't just fighting you, Evelyn. I was fighting a ghost. I let the silence sit long enough to make sure it wasn't just another layer of performance. So you decided to make me disappear, I said. I told myself I was protecting our marriage, she replied. At first, it was little things, rescheduling visits, telling him you were busy when you hadn't called yet. Then it became intercepting your messages, deleting emails. Every time I thought about letting you back in, I remembered Marcus and I couldn't. She paused, then looked up. Do you remember when you had your appendix removed last year? I stiffened. 4 days in the hospital. He was your emergency contact, Serena said. The hospital called him. He was halfway there when I called back and told him you didn't want him to see you like that a friend was taking care of you. He believed me. I told him you'd be embarrassed. I thought I was saving him from stress. It hit me like a physical thing. The nights I'd lain awake in that hospital bed, wondering if my son would have even noticed if I'd died. Academic debate phrase here, counterfactual regret. The realization of what could have happened if a different choice had been made. She kept going as if she'd been storing these confessions in a dam, and now the water couldn't stop. When your car broke down 2 winters ago, he wanted to drive out and help. I told him you'd called a tow truck and didn't need him. When you had pneumonia, I told him you were fine and didn't want visitors. Every memory she described slid into place like tiles in a mosaic I hadn't realized was missing pieces. The image was ugly but complete. Why tell me this now, I asked. She folded her hands tightly, knuckles pale. Because the night before his last surgery, he told me he was going to leave me. He said he couldn't stay married to someone who'd kept him from his mother. He said he'd call you after the surgery and explain everything. And then her voice broke. He never got the chance. For a moment, I saw her not as the architect of my exile, but as a woman who'd built her own prison. The bars were made of jealousy, but they'd held her just as tightly. I stood because sitting any longer felt like agreeing with her choices. I have to go, I said. Where? To the bank. To see what else Caleb wanted me to know. She didn't follow me to the door this time, just sat there staring at her coffee like it might give her a different ending. At First National, the vault room felt colder than before. Box 247 yielded its contents as if it had been waiting impatiently, the 3 letters, the ring. And now I noticed tucked in the corner a small photo of Caleb and me at his high school graduation. He had his arm around my shoulders, grinning like the future was an open highway. On the back, in his handwriting, for when you need to remember who we were. I slipped the photo into my wallet. Redundancy again, if I ever lost the letters or the ring, I'd still have this.
Back home, I set the items on the kitchen table. The ring caught the light, the bracelet gleamed, and the letters lay in their envelope like a promise not yet called in. I could feel Caleb in all of it, not as a ghost, but as a presence, deliberate and calm. The phone stayed quiet that night, and for once, I didn't mind. I sat with my son's words, the weight of the ring on my finger, and the quiet certainty that the next step would be mine alone to decide. By morning, the house had that early day hush where even the toaster seems to whisper. I made tea and pretended the steam could iron out the next 24 hours. Serena texted at 8:03 a.m., not a sentence, just, please. Economy of language heavy on subtext. Old age wisdom slid in like a chair being pulled out for me when someone finally chooses the truth. Don't make them stand while they say it. I pocketed my phone and walked over. She'd opened the blinds. The room was brighter, harsher. No scented candles, no softening filters. A legal pad sat on the coffee table with bullet points like she'd been workshopping her own guilt. I need to finish, she said before I sat. The parts I left out yesterday. All right, I said, and took the chair by the window, because light makes liars clumsy. Joke 1 self-preservation with a lampshade on its head. She started with the small cuts that add up the passwords she changed for security. The calendar invites she sent Caleb that conveniently overlapped with my visits. The Christmas cards from me, she told him, must have gotten lost in the mail. Then she reached the larger wounds. The funeral, she said quietly. I moved it up because I couldn't bear the idea of you there next to me. I told myself it would be easier if it was private, but that wasn't about grief, it was about control. I wanted the last frame to be mine. She slid a folder across to me, photocopies of emails, flagged texts she'd sent from Caleb's phone. Some were almost comical in their impersonation. Caleb never used the word alas, and here it was dying on the vine. Joke 2, if you're going to catfish your mother-in-law, at least learn your victim's diction. Still seeing my own messages ricochet into Serena's trash folder made my stomach tip. There's more, she said, pinching the bridge of her nose as if she could squeeze out the courage. The night your appendix ruptured. He stayed awake crying because he thought you were alone. I told him you were with a friend. He started the car. I took the keys and told him you'd be furious if he saw you in a hospital gown. I weaponized your dignity. She swallowed. In the winter your car died near mile marker 26. He checked your location on the family plan we shared and begged me to let him go. I said the tow truck was already there. He stood in the kitchen with his coat on for an hour. He was still holding the keys when he fell asleep on the couch. There it was, the devastating truth I'd been bracing for, not just absence, but thwarted presence. He had tried. The years had not been a vacuum. They'd been a hallway with a locked door and a mother-in-law standing in front of it with a pleasant smile. Academic debate phrase for the record, motivated reasoning. Serena kept choosing the story that saved her from fear, then decorated it until it looked like a value. Why are you handing me all this? I asked, tapping the folder. Because your son left you the power to decide my future, she said, voice steadying into something like resignation, and you can't decide without the whole exhibit list. She attempted a thin smile. Consider this full discovery, no redactions. We sat in the brightness, two women with different kinds of ruin in our laps. I held a memorial last night, I said, surprising myself. In the garden. I didn't invite you. It wasn't that kind of ceremony. A dozen of Caleb's high school friends came by, the ones who used to leave muddy cleats by my back door and swear they'd hose the patio later. We sang badly, we laughed exactly when crying needed to catch its breath, and we told stories the time he fixed a wobbly picnic table with a folded sugar packet. The summer he tried to teach my cat to fetch,
and got scratched into humility. Quirky fact for the anthropologist among us: if you hang a strand of white Christmas lights over a lemon tree, people will instinctively lower their voices. It was like we were in a sacred tent made of citrus and electricity. Serena closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were clear. He would have loved that.
He would have, I said. I could feel the strand of lights still glowing behind my ribs. Mrs. Burnham brought lemon bars. She claims butter is a theology. Serena's mouth twitched. Your neighbor with the librarian posture, that's the one. She files people alphabetically in her head so she can retrieve them quickly. Joke, 3 gentle like slippers on linoleum.
Serena folded her hands. There's one last thing. She disappeared down the hall and returned with a slim box. Inside was a flash drive. The investigator sent Caleb a copy of the report. I kept this after he died. I couldn't bring myself to delete it. It has timestamps of everything, the calls you made, the messages I blocked. There's also footage from the doorbell camera the night you brought the chocolate cake 2 years ago. I told him we already had dinner plans. The video shows him seeing you at the door and... She blinked hard. He smiled before he remembered he was supposed to be annoyed. I made him rehearse a story. I held the box its weight ridiculous for what it contained. You kept all this because I thought if anyone ever asked for the truth, I could finally stop carrying it by myself, she said. And because I knew that if I destroyed it, that would be the one line I couldn't pretend I hadn't crossed. We let that sit between us. Outside, a delivery truck exhaled at the curb, and somewhere a dog complained about the audacity of cardboard. I remembered something Caleb wrote in one of the unsent letters. People think love is a soft thing, but it's the only thing that can bear weight without snapping. He'd built redundancies for me. Maybe this flash drive was Serena's first honest copy.
What do you want from me? I asked finally.
Nothing I deserve, she said. But if you decide not to burn my life to the ground, I'll sign whatever you want me to sign. Statements, disclosures, counseling commitments. I'll apologize in writing and in person to anyone you choose. I will not ask you for money. She took a breath. And if you decide to take everything, I'll move into a studio and learn how to live with a smaller echo. I stood the room tilting back into place around the decision I hadn't made yet. I don't know what justice looks like by dinner, I said. But I know what it shouldn't look like: vengeance warmed over and served as closure. That stuff never sticks. On my way out, I paused at the doorway. One more question. Why lilies at the market? Mrs. Burnham saw you buying them and telling the cashier they were for a hospital room. Serena's smile was brief and baffled. Because they were his favorite, she said. He said they smelled like forgiveness. I was trying to buy a shortcut. She shook her head. You can't buy your way out of a maze you built. I walked home slowly, letting the flash drive's small gravity tug my steps back into a human pace. At the corner, I passed the community notice board where people post piano lessons and lost and found parakeets. Someone had tacked up a flyer for a lecture at the community college Memory and Narrative: How Stories Edit Our Lives. I almost laughed. If there was a registration table for that class, I'd be the keynote and the cautionary tale. Back in my kitchen, I set the drive beside Caleb's letters, the ring, the bracelet. My table looked like a museum's quietest gallery. I brewed tea, the lemon pie, blinking at me from its box like an indulgence with good intentions, and opened my notebook. On a fresh page, I wrote a heading. Big letters. Black pen options. Under it, 2 columns, justice and mercy. And then, because life is not a binary, even when we want it to be, I drew a third, both. Academic phrase to keep me honest, dialectical synthesis. 2 true things held together, making a third truth that can breathe.
I wrote until the steam from my mug ran out of ambition. If I gave her the house, it wouldn't be because she asked. It would be because Caleb wouldn't want her homeless. If I withheld the money, it wouldn't be punishment. It would be a boundary that didn't fund the architecture of harm. The foundation in his name that felt right in my bones, like planting a tree whose shade you'll never sit under and doing it anyway.
Night slid in without asking the way it always does. I turned on the strand of white lights over the lemon tree in the yard and watched them blink to life one by one, like tiny decisions that had finally learned to glow. Tomorrow, I'd meet Mark again. Tomorrow, I'd sign things. Tonight, I'd let the house be a house and the grief be a guest who no longer rattled the dishes. Mark's office felt smaller the second time, maybe because the decisions I carried in with me were bulkier than the leather chairs. Serena sat to my left, eyes fixed on the folder in front of her like it might hiss if she looked away. Mark cleared his throat the way people do when they're about to preside over something irreversible. "Mrs. Whitaker has made her decision," he said, using my legal name because this was the part where ink mattered. Old age wisdom surfaced in my mind when you can't decide what to keep start by removing what you can't live with. I looked at Serena. "You'll keep the house. Free and clear, that's all." Her head jerked up. "What?" "The savings and the life insurance will go into a foundation in Caleb's name programs that help children maintain connections with grandparents after divorce or family conflict. He was robbed of that kind of connection. Other families don't have to be." Mark's pen made a slow note. I continued. "You'll sign a written statement of what you did, full disclosure, no soft edits. It stays private unless you try to rewrite the story or come near me again. You'll also attend counseling. Not as a box to tick, but to figure out why you thought love and control were the same thing." Serena's fingers twisted the tissue in her lap until it looked like a knot. "I understand." I reached into my bag and slid a small photo album across the table. "These are pictures of Caleb you never saw because you cut me out of his story. Him at 5, covered in birthday cake. Him at 17, grinning at his high school graduation. Every one of these moments made the man you married. You tried to delete the prologue." She opened the album slowly like it might sting. Her breath caught at one shot of him, fixing a wobbly shelf in my kitchen. "He was so sure he could fix anything," she said. "That was his grandfather's gift," I replied. "An engineer's hands and a gardener's patience. Joke one gentle more soil than sting." Serena closed the album and set her palms flat on it. "Thank you for not..." She stopped herself. "For not doing worse." "This isn't mercy," I said. "This is what Caleb would have wanted. You're not homeless, but you're also not rewarded for the harm. There's a difference." Mark slid the documents forward. Serena signed without hesitation, the pen scratching like it was chewing through the last layer of her denial. My signature followed steady despite the tremor I could feel in my pulse. When the legal portion ended, Serena looked at me. "Will you tell me about him before me?" I could have said no. I could have guarded those memories like state secrets. But I remembered Caleb's unsent words, "I wish he knew loving you didn't mean loving her less." He was curious about everything I began. Took apart the toaster when he was 4 because he wanted to see where the bread went. Used to time the microwave to stop at 0:01 because he liked beating the beep. He once made me sit through a 20-minute explanation of how smoke alarms chirp every 43 seconds when the battery's low. Her lips curved faintly. He did that with our toaster oven. Took it apart on the kitchen floor. I nodded. He got that from me, saving things instead of throwing them away. Not always for the better. Joke 2, self-inflicted honesty. She held the album like it weighed more than its pages. "I'll take care of the house," she said. "And I'll sign whatever you send for the foundation. I can't undo what I did, but maybe I can keep someone else from doing the same." Mark gathered the signed pages. "Then we're finished here," he said. His voice had the kind of finality you could lean against if you were tired enough. Outside, the air felt wider. Serena walked to her car, the album clutched to her chest. Before she got in, she turned. "Evelyn, thank you for letting me leave with something." I didn't answer. I just got in my car, bracelet cool against my wrist, the ring warm on my finger. The drive home felt like crossing a bridge you'd built yourself slowly, one plank at a time. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the flash drive from Serena Caleb's letters, the ring, the bracelet. The table looked like the aftermath of a careful excavation. I plugged the drive into my laptop and opened the investigator's report. Dates, times, call logs, even stills from that doorbell camera. And there it was, me at the door with the birthday cake, him smiling before he remembered to look inconvenienced. Academic debate phrase, behavioral leakage. The truth sneaking past the mask. I paused the image there and left it on the screen as I made tea. It felt like having him in the room, not the polite, distant version from those last years, but the boy who still beat the microwave and called it a victory. Before bed, I made a note in my journal under the both column justice is keeping harm from continuing. Mercy is giving someone a chance to stop doing it. Then I added in smaller handwriting, and love is knowing which is which. The house settled into its night noises, and I thought of the Foundation's first meeting next month. I'd already decided on the name, The Infinite Heart Project. Caleb's words, living in the world without needing my permission anymore. 6 months later, the maple by Caleb's grave had grown a full crown of new leaves, the kind that whisper to each other in the wind, like they know secrets you can't rush out of them. I came with a folding chair, this time old age, wisdom, grief walks better when you give it somewhere to sit. The lilies I brought were already open, their scent threading through the air in a way that made the whole section feel like it had taken a deep breath. The Infinite Heart Project had been running for 3 months. In that short time, we'd matched grandparents with legal resources, helped mediate 2 custody disputes, and even funded a little girl's trip across state lines to spend her first Christmas with her father's parents. I kept the quarterly report in my bag like a portable reminder that something good could sprout from wreckage. Academic debate phrase to sum it up, restorative justice in practice, not just the absence of harm, but the presence of repair. Serena hadn't called since that day in Mark's office. She'd sent one email through him, a short update, that she'd started counseling and joined a volunteer group that delivered meals to homebound seniors. Trying to learn what care looks like when it's not about control, she'd written. I didn't reply, but I didn't delete it either. At home, the ring stayed on my finger, the bracelet on my wrist, and the photo from Caleb's graduation was tucked into the frame of my kitchen window. Quirky fact, when you look at a picture every day while washing dishes, you start to hear the laugh behind it, like an auditory ghost that's friendly enough to keep. One Sunday morning, while tending the lemon tree in the yard, I realized I hadn't thought about Serena in weeks. The white lights I'd hung over the branches still worked, each bulb holding its tiny electric promise. I'd hosted 2 more backyard memorials since the first small gatherings with friends and neighbors, where stories about Caleb were told between sips of tea and bites of whatever dessert Mrs. Burnham decided was spiritually necessary. Joke 1, she swears fudge has medicinal properties. I'd also started walking in the evenings, a habit Caleb used to tease me about. "Mom, you're casing the neighborhood like a friendly detective," he'd say. But the walks had become a way to listen to the quiet, to the trees, to whatever my heart was trying to file under ongoing. Old age wisdom here. Sometimes the best conversations are the ones you have without moving your lips. One cool Tuesday, a package arrived in the mail with no return address. Inside was a framed photo I'd never seen Caleb at about 30 standing in a garden I didn't recognize, caught mid-laugh at something off camera. On the back, in handwriting that wasn't his, it read, "Found this in his desk drawer. Thought you should have it. Thank you for showing me what love looks like. I'm learning." It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. I placed it on the mantle next to the others, and for the first time the arrangement felt complete, not because the story was over, but because it no longer needed to be rewritten. That evening, as I sat on the porch with tea, I thought about the pattern of the last year: lies, dismantled truths, aired, harm, acknowledged, and something new planted in the cleared ground. The Infinite Heart Project had already touched more lives than I could count, and in some strange way, I felt Caleb's hand in each decision nudging me toward the balance he'd asked for in his letter Wisdom without revenge. Quirky tidbit for the philosophers: the Greeks had a word, metanoia, for the turning of the heart toward a new way of being. It wasn't about forgetting the past, it was about changing the trajectory of the future. I like to think that's what we were both doing, me and Serena, in our separate orbits. The sun dropped low enough to light the maple leaves from beneath, turning them into green glass. I breathed in the warm air, the faint tang of lemon from the tree, and let the quiet settle like a shawl. The grief was still there, but it had softened its edges, learned my schedule stopped kicking the furniture, and in its place had grown a sense of, not peace exactly, but something that could pass for it on a good day. Before I went inside, I whispered toward the maple, the lemon tree, the photo in the window, and whatever part of the world might still be listening: we did okay, Caleb. We did okay. The story follows Evelyn, a mother blindsided by the news of her son Caleb's sudden death, delivered coldly by her daughter-in-law Serena. Initially shut out of the funeral and left in the dark about his final days, Evelyn begins quietly investigating, uncovering a web of lies. Serena has spent years intercepting calls, deleting emails, and fabricating excuses to keep Caleb and Evelyn apart, driven by jealousy and a past heartbreak. When Serena's control unravels due to a change in Caleb's will, Evelyn learns from attorney Mark Ellison that Caleb hired a private investigator and left everything: house savings, life insurance to her, along with a letter granting her the power to decide Serena's fate. The letter also leads Evelyn to a coffee can containing a key to a safety deposit box where she finds unsent letters from Caleb, a family heirloom ring, and a bracelet from his youth. Serena eventually confesses the full extent of her actions, including moments when Caleb had tried to be there for Evelyn but was blocked. Faced with the choice between revenge and mercy, Evelyn opts for a middle path. Serena keeps the house, but must sign a confession, attend counseling, and stay away. The remaining assets fund the Infinite Heart Project, a foundation helping families maintain grandparent-grandchild bonds. Months later, Evelyn visits Caleb's grave and hosts small memorials in her garden, finding comfort in community and the knowledge that his legacy lives on. Serena, in her own way, begins to change. A final unexpected photo from Caleb's desk arrives with a note of gratitude. Evelyn places it among the others, feeling the story no longer needs rewriting. Guided by Caleb's words, wisdom not revenge, she moves forward carrying love and justice in equal measure.